Okay, we're starting tonight at Job 23, 24, just see how far along we can get. As I said, it's got 42 chapters. I'm not going to go through every verse like we've been doing, but we're hitting the high points. Job is now talking again, and we have heard the last speech of Eliphaz. This speech that he heard truly, obviously hurt him because you think about this, he's going to continue to emphasize, Job is going to continue to emphasize the points that he has been making all along. Wants he desires to find God and tell God his case. He's told his friends. The friends just kind of dismissing. And the one thing I like about this is the fact that Job still trusts God. He still believes that God's going to and is hearing him, even though he doesn't understand. He still believes that God is in charge, even though it seems like to him, his whole world has been turned upside down. He still has the faith in God to know that God's doing what's best for him. A lot of times when I go through trials and tribulations, I wonder if God is doing what's best for me. But I also remember as a father bringing up my children that whenever I was punishing or disciplining them for something they did wrong, I knew I was doing what was best for them at that moment in time, though they probably would have disagreed with that. Yeah. So I think that parallel there between fathers and their children and God and us being his children really helps us to appreciate God that much more and know that God is always going to work out and do what's best for all of us. So he begins chapter 23 in verses 1 and 2, and he says, "Even today, my complaint is bitter. My stroke is heavier than my groaning." And obviously I'm reading from the King James Version there. And so I jump all over the place when I'm studying and so forth. I'll read from King James, New King James, the English Standard, whatever else. But that's what he's saying. So what does he say here in chapter 23? He says, even right now at this moment in day, even today, my complaint is bitter. All the friends have said have not brought him any consolation whatsoever. They've only added to what Job was going through. And he says, my complaint is bitter. And the ideal is that, again, it brings sadness, melancholy, distressing. He has not found any relief from his friends. He does not know where to find God to make sure that God understands what he's going through. Now, did they really have the idea of God's omniscience? Did they have the idea that God was everywhere? I think they did. But again, whenever you're suffering, you begin to wonder, well, where is he? Surely if he knows what I'm doing and he knows everything about me, then why isn't he there to help me, to comfort me, to strengthen me at this moment in time when I need him the most?
Yeah, sorry, I think it's that idea that because he's everywhere, then I need him with me now to strengthen me and support me, and I'm not getting that. So where is God?
Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of people in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament struggle with the idea. Where's God when I need him the most? I was reading through the book of Samuel, and Saul, whenever he was being surrounded by the Philistines and so forth like that, and he knew that he knew he had sinned, and he said, "Where's God now?" Well, God's still there watching what's going on. Here's your chance, Saul, to do things differently, but Saul goes on just thinking that God has left him, and he kind of dies as you think about his death with the Philistines, as well as his son Jonathan's death. He probably feels like that God has totally left him, but who left who? Right? Yeah. Left who in that situation? And so a lot of times when we think about a lot of Christians that are complaining about things they're going through, struggling with difficulties they're going through, they may be saying, where's God? But what the question we need to be saying is, or the answer we need to be giving, God is where he's always been. What have you done? How far have you moved away from him? And again, that may be something for all of us to consider. He said, my stroke is heavier than my groaning. All of his sighs are in no proportion with his suffering. And again, if they think he's complaining, and as far as Job sees, and understands at that point in time, the only people that are listening to him are his three friends who have added to what his, by making a lot of assumptions that were not there. And so he says, if you think that I'm complaining, you just don't understand the grief that I'm going through. Whenever we groan, whenever we sigh, whenever we struggle, it's not necessarily wrong. But if we complain and become bitter,
yeah,
that's where it goes wrong. And again, it's easy to say that as I'm sitting in a nice, comfortable chair in a nice air-conditioned / heated office, and everything's going good for me right now. But it's hard whenever we deal with these things that happen in our lives that we have absolutely no control over. That's when it gets tough. And that's when we have to hold on to the fact that God's there and he hears and he knows. And Job, as he's gone through all of this, all he's been hearing is more accusations and no encouragement, except repent of the things that you've done, which he says, I've not done anything. So another thing that we got to think about, and this is something that I think we need to tell people all the time, remind them, is whenever we do struggle, and we will, but every time we do struggle, we need to keep in mind that there's going to be a better world where there's not going to be any more groaning, difficulties. And it should cause us, especially with the eyes of faith, it should cause us to look forward to that time even that much more. Yeah. And I've kind of said and brought this out time and time again, but as Job and his three friends kind of repeat everything, I don't think it's necessarily wrong for me to repeat everything. Because again, sometimes we don't get it. Sometimes Tommy doesn't.
We need reminding sometimes.
That's just a reminder. That's it. So he begins in verse 3 now and going through verse 9, and he says these words, oh, that I knew where I might find him. And again, the commentators and the translators seem to suggest he's talking about God. He said that I might come to his seat. I would present my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know the words which he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in his great power? No.
Yeah.
But he would take note of me. There the upright could reason with him, and I would be delivered forever from my judge. Look, I go forward, but he's not there. Backward, but I cannot perceive him. When he works on the left hand, I cannot behold him. When he turns to the right hand, I cannot see him. But then notice verse 10. But he knows the way I take. He has tested me. I love that. After saying everything he says here from verse 3 all the way down, complaining about not being able to find God, wondering if God's listening, I do know that in verse 10, you see that faith. He does know the way I take. And so literally, maybe by what we might say, the skin of his teeth, he's holding on to what faith he has so that he can continue to do what God wants and expects of him to do.
And brother, if his friends were of such that they would even ask these same questions that he's asking, it would have given him a lot more comfort. Because he's saying, all I want is just a chance to explain myself and to find out what is happening. But you see, the friends take it the other way to think that, well, you did something wrong and that's why you can't find it. So he's still hanging on to his faith, which is a credit to him.
It is. And that's the thing. It's easy to have faith whenever everything's going good for us. Mm-hmm. It is a whole different matter when everything is just collapsing around us. Yeah. And that's what we've got to learn to do. And that's what I think God's reasoning for putting this in here. I believe he's emphasizing that idea. He said, I want to seek God. I've served him. I've prayed to him. I've sought to find him. Yet God is still so far away. He feels like that his access to God is removed. And he feels like that only God can vindicate his cause. And God's silence has really bothered him through all of this. And I think that's part of the big issue, because when God is silent, we wonder, where are you? What are you doing? Sometimes, again, you think about this may very well been the patriarchal age, so God would have spoken to them. And later in the book, he does speak. the thing that I think about is the fact that because Job has not heard anything from God, then he hasn't given up the faith yet, but at the same time, he's wondering, Lord,
Yeah.
I don't understand this. Why? Here it is. So he says they should cause us to look for a better world where there wish be no groanings and struggles and difficulties. So he said, I want to find him. I want to come to see him. I would order my cause before him. I would set my case before him, is what he's saying there.
Yeah.
He says, and I will fill my mouth with arguments. He wants to present his evidence and plead his cause as in a court of justice.
Yeah.
He would show that he is not as guilty as his friends have charged. He will prove that he is the friend of God. So now look at it. You see, again, because I think of the sickness, his mood changes. And it just goes from one extreme to the other very quickly. And again, it goes back to the idea because he's sick.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I've been around people that's been sick. One moment they're just talking to you just as nicely as they can. Then whenever they are hurting, they lash out at you. And you have to stand that. You've just got to deal with that. You've got to maybe at that point in time give them an opportunity to kind of get themselves together. You may need to leave at that moment in time. I think all of these things come into play there. And I think that's what he's trying to say. He's now once humble, now he's proud and haughty. Again, back in chapter 13, verse 17 through 18, he declares his innocence. He gives cases of ungodly people for suffering, and he just wants an explanation.
Yeah.
That's it. It's not that he's begging God to take it away from him, though I'm sure it is. There's some hurt you can't take away. But I think, again, more than anything else, he just wants to know why.
Yeah, and I think because when you know why, when you have a reason for what's happening, then you're better able to deal with it. But he just is totally blank. He doesn't know. For one thing, he knows that he has not done anything obviously wrong to deserve this or to be equal to the punishment. And then he's just wanting to find out why. And in some of those cases, I think he goes off a little in terms of being human. Yeah, but he just wants to know why.
That's exactly right. And we all struggle with why. We all struggle with the why. And so as you look at that, he wants to know, I think he wants to know verse 5, he says and emphasizes this idea. I want to know the words with which he would answer me. I want to hear him. Okay, Job, you're going to get your wish. But it may not be, again, as we look at God's answer, he's not going to tell him the reason why. But he is going to say, Job, were you there when I created the heavens and the earth? Job, are you there continuing to sustain it? Are you taking care of all these animals and so forth? And I've mentioned this many, many times because I think God is just saying, I don't owe you an answer.
Yeah.
But your faith is that you've got to keep trusting, even though you don't understand the why. And so that's what he's emphasizing is that I want to fill my mouth with arguments. I want to be able to know that. And he wants to know how God would answer his case. He wants to know what God would say about it. And I think, again, to me, that's the most important thing. A lot of people have a lot of different opinions about me, but what I really want is what does God say about me?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the only thing that's going to matter on the day of judgment. So again, in verse 5, he says, and I want to understand what he would say to me. Again, this parallelism is brought out. He's saying the same thing in verse 5 twice. So he says, will he plead with me or will he contend with me in his great power? No, but he would take note of me. He said, I know that God won't overpower me and make me unable to present my cause by crushing him. And think about this. If God wanted to, God could have crushed him, but he said, I've been this long. I know that God has a reason for it. Now, obviously, I'm not just wanting to know why, but I'm also wanting to understand. And understanding and why is the same thing in one sense, but in another sense, I just want these things off of me so I can breathe, I can present my case. I don't want you, God, to continue to overpower me as I feel like it's been up to this point in time. And again, another beautiful thing about this is the fact that what? He trusts God to do that.
Mhm.
Trust God
Yeah.
not to kill him here at this stage. He trusts that God will give him the strength to maintain his cause, because he says, you know what? I know that God knows everything about me, unlike you three guys that are accusing me of everything. I know that God knows. So there he again proclaims his faith. And again, I love this. I love this. So we go on to verse 7. There the upright could reason with him, and I would be delivered forever from my judge. The idea of this is, you know, the upright man might argue and reason with God, appeal to God's justice, God's mercy. And by the way, that's the only appeal that we have, is God's
Mhm.
mercy, right? And so he feels like he would be vindicated. So he says, that I be delivered forever from my judge. Now, again, depending on what commentary you read, some people think he's talking about the judge here may very well be God. In the New King James Version, they capitalize that word to suggest that he is talking about God. Other translations put it down for the idea that judge here does not refer to God, but to his friends that have been judging him all along.
Okay.
Okay. So he feels if God will judge him, and if God will judge him guiltless, then he'll be forevermore free from Bildad and Eliphaz and Zophar and all their rantings that they've made. And again, this has been an extra burden on his heart. Not just everything he's dealt with, but his friends have hurt him deeply. And
Yeah, but sorry,
go ahead,
brother. Isn't he saying in an opposite way the same thing that his friends are saying? Because his friends are saying, you are evil, you have done wrong, you have done sin, therefore you can't come to God. Now he's thinking that an upright man, because he's upright, also has the right to argue and question God. Mm-hmm. But not even the upright man has the right to do that. So to me, I see him doing it in a while he's more positively saying that only the wicked suffer. Mm-hmm. But he's saying if you can be so righteous that then God would hear you, but not necessarily so, because he's righteous and God is choosing to be silent. So to me, I see that sort of an irony with that. I don't know what you think.
I agree with that 100%. When God is silent, that's when all these other questions really begin to play around in our minds, to the point to where, again, Satan may very well be using a lot of those questions as well, as he's struggling with all of this. And maybe perhaps Satan is also grinning in the corner because he got what he wanted, and the fact that God took away everything. As Job is going through this test, Satan sees Job struggling, and he may be feeling like, I'm close to victory here. But so I think, again, he keeps piling it on, or keeps bringing those questions, those doubts. And that's another thing I think a lot about. When something bad happens, we want to know why. But then we also make the assumption that his friends have made, that obviously something I have done is wrong and I should not have done that. Thirdly, the moment that happens, doubt is created in our mind, and doubt is the opposite of faith. So because those doubts are created, if we could just leave him alone long enough, then perhaps those doubts will convince him that God does not care for him, and he will go over to my side. I really believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, here we go, beyond a shadow of a doubt, hear that? That Satan uses doubt a lot to get a lot of Christians. I think we may have mentioned before that there are Christians that have been members of the church, and they're still wandering around, wondering if they're going to be saved or not. They have no definite thing. Then you go to the opposite extreme, or the ideal of once saved, always saved, where we're making statements that's not true either. So Satan is smart, and he's had a lot of practice at this. So when I struggle with my doubts, and we all do have them, then the best thing to do at that moment in time is to break down, get on our knees and pray and beg God for help and ask God for words of affirmation. Help us, Lord, to see some words of affirmation in your word that's going to help us. Because doubt will lead to a lack of faith, which could lead to turning your back upon him.
Yeah.
And again, I wonder how many times that happened. Think about how many times Jesus would ask his disciples, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? Well, Lord, we're not used to anybody doing miracles. Here you are doing all these miracles. I'm not sure that I can really believe what I'm seeing. Not sure that I'm really believing what I'm hearing. And then you also, Peter, why did you doubt? Well, Lord, have you noticed there's a storm around here?
Yeah.
The waves are crashing down in the boat. And have you not noticed that we're in trouble? No.
Yeah.
I'm the Lord of heaven and earth. I've got this under control.
Exactly. Yeah.
Worry is a big problem in the church. It's a big problem among Christians. Doubts are, Satan is using every one of these things to attack us. And we've got to be aware of the adversary. So we go on to verse 7. He says, the righteous might dispute with him whenever I'm there before pleading my case. He says, Job feels that there before the higher tribunal, the upright man might be able to argue with God, appealing to justice and mercy. And again, even in this, you kind of see how Job is feeling. He still feels that even if he goes through that trial, he would be vindicated, not like his friends have been doing and accusing him of everything. So he says, here I want to be delivered from my judge. But where? Verse 8, I'll go forward, he's not there. And backward, but I cannot perceive him. When he works on the left hand, I cannot behold him. When he turns to the right hand, I cannot see him. So here again, he's complaining, or he's bringing in a complaint. I can't find God. So where can I even bring my cause before him? When he talks about verses 8 and 9, left, right, forward, and backwards, some translations say I've looked for him in the east, the west, the north, and the south, every which way I could. And, so God is looking toward the rising sun, or Job is looking for some evidence of God. He looks toward the west whenever the sun is going down. He looks in vain. The left hand and the right hand, and he sees nothing. Again, God's silence. And so he just, what do? You hang in there. And I love the story of Job for that reason. He goes on, and notice what he says, verses 10 through 12, but he knows the way I take. I like that. God, I can't see any evidence of you. I can't see that you're really listening. I can't see what's going on. I can't see how this is, but Lord, you know the way that I take. And when he has tested me, I shall come out as gold. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. This is the first time in all the book of Job, as Job has been talking, that there's the idea of a purifying element in trials. Okay. In other words, he's been living his life hunky-dory all along. Then all this happens. And God allowed, I think, Satan to test him, obviously, because Satan wanted to. But I think for another reason, did God do this so that Job would then see how strong a man he really was, even in the midst of everything that's going on? Sometimes we need to see how strong we are to be able to fight whatever it is that we're going to have to fight. Yeah. And we've often preached and heard people say that one test is building you up for another. Yeah. And the next test is going to be worse. When I'm in first grade, the test is spelling test, and all I got to learn is to learn how to spell the word. By the 12th grade, I now have to write huge papers, right? To see, and the teacher's going to see if I have a good concept of English. And if I have brought my thoughts and everything together, when I go into college, it even gets worse, right?
Yeah.
And so then there's just life itself, testing you with things that you have no control over. Again, losing a job, losing a loved one, struggling to make ends meet. All those things happen. All those things.
There are two passages that comes to my mind. Paul,
okay.
Paul in Romans talks about we glory in tribulation,
right?
Knowing the benefits that it will bring, and you wonder how does a person glory in tribulation and testing? But Paul says there's an end result. It works for our good. It's perseverance and hope and all of that. And then Peter says, the trial of your faith works patience.
Right.
So in those two passages, we see that there is that suffering is redemptive.
Right.
And it depends on how we face our trials and go through them. We can become despondent, that we can turn away from God, but it can also push us towards God.
Right. Right. And we have the choice, right? That's
right,
it.
Yeah.
And that's and I think, again, this is part of the reason why we need to study Job and these other passages you brought out in Romans and Peter as well. Temptation, trials are going to come. Are we going to stay faithful or not? How many folks are we losing to in the church now because of COVID?
Yeah.
Because of the struggles with the lack of faith, in the eldership or whatever it is, whatever decisions were made. Why aren't people coming back? It's just easier to stay at home and worship God in your pajamas than it is to actually get out and make an effort to come to worship, right? There's just so many things here that apply to what we're talking about here. There's much in us that needs to be purified. And a lot of times the only way that could be happening is if we go through the fire. And I have in my notes here many years ago, Christians should not dread trials, but realize that God is allowing us to go through the cleansing so that we can be all that he knows we're capable of being.
Yeah.
Sometimes Tommy gets satisfied and Tommy needs something to stir him up to keep on working and becoming better than what he was. And I think we all get that way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Motions in worship. We go through the motions on our job. We go through the motions in our families. We go through the motions and we don't grow. We don't continue to challenge ourselves to be better husbands, wives, children, all the way across the board there. And we don't challenge ourselves to be better Christians. We even go so far as to say, well, I've been to worship. I've sang my songs. I partook of the cracker and grape juice. Now the rest of the day is mine to do what I want to with it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's the case either, right? God is trying to wake us up to what we need to be doing. So he says, goes on to verse 11, my foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way and not turned aside. A lot of times, notice he said, my foot has held my steps. A lot of people in the East would travel, or they would walk, but they would do it with sandals. A lot of them walk barefooted, right? And so it seems like that as he would be walking along, to be sure-footed, your toes would grab certain things to make sure that you wouldn't fall or collapse or something like that. Now, I've been wearing shoes all of my life. My dad taught me that you always wear shoes. And if I was to walk out on the gravel, oh, woe is me, soft foot. So the thing is Job is saying here, no matter what, I have followed God as much as I could.
Yeah.
And I've done it as it was with bare feet. So whenever the things happen, my toes are able to hold on to it. I'm firm. I'm not going to decline from doing what God says. And again, as I was studying this and thinking about this, I asked myself the question, do we do the same thing? Are we still walking with God? How many times have we stumbled? Why have we stumbled? Was it because we weren't looking ahead and seeing what we got coming up ahead of us? Of course, there's some things we can't know. There's some things we can't know. But on the flip side of the deal, I should be strong enough that whenever those hammer blows come, that it may knock me down a little bit, but I'm going to get right back up and keep on going, because that's what I know I need to do. And do we need to emphasize this to Christians today? I think so.
Yeah.
Because Christianity is not one of those things, and you know what I'm saying, it's not one of those things in which it's easy. It's to me, the easiest thing about being a Christian is going to worship, right?
Yes, yes.
I'm surrounded by everybody that's agreeing with the fact that we're there to worship God, and I'm being encouraged, and that's the easiest thing to do, is going out living the life that I'm supposed to live the rest of the week.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we need to be teaching this to the church and really emphasizing this to the church. He said, I've not departed from the commandment of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. So think about, again, the idea. He's not shrank back from doing any of the commandments of God. He's done all of it to the best of his ability. He has esteemed it. He's esteemed or hid it like a treasure, more than my necessary food. Some other marginal readings might say more than my own law. The ideal is that as far as Job was concerned, God's laws and commands were more important to him than anything. And then you think about the idea of how Jesus taught the same idea in the book of John, chapter 4, as he's talking to the woman of Samaria. And we remember that, in fact, I preached on it just a little bit this last week, not so much the conversation as much as the idea of the worshiping in spirit and in truth. But notice verse 34 of John 4, Jesus will say, he continues to talk with her, and the disciples came and say, Rabbi, eat. He said, I have food to eat which you do not know of. And the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him anything to eat? And he said, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work.
Yeah.
That's the way Jesus looked at his. So our food is to do the will of him who has given us life and to do his work, finish his work. It's not getting done what I want to get done, but finishing his work. And so he goes on and emphasizes this to the disciples. He says, you know what? You're just entering into other people's labors. You need to realize this is your work. This is your job, to do the will of the Father, and understand that you've got to finish it. How many folks, again, start but never finish?
Yeah.
Powerful, powerful lesson right there. And again, one that we need to be bringing out constantly to the church. So picking up with verse 13, as Job continues his speech, he's troubled and how God has dealt with him. Let's listen to what he says. He's unique, and who can make him change? Whatever his soul desires, that he does. He performs what is appointed for me, and many such things are with him. Therefore, I am terrified at his presence. When I consider this, I'm afraid of him. For God made my heart weak, and the Almighty terrifies me, because I was not cut off from the presence of darkness, and he did not hide deep darkness from my face. Since times are not hidden from the Almighty, why do those who know him see not his days? So I read on into the 24th chapter, but let's see what he's trying to say there. And I think that 24 just goes on with what he's been saying there at that point in time. He says, now back in verses 6 through 12, Job had hoped that God would allow him to plead his cause. But now he's kind of back in verse 13, he's complaining about the situation. God has not called him to court. God has not called him to do what, and Job also knows that God will not change. He just has to submit to what God says. So what God desires, and whatever God desires, God does. That's it. And so that's, again, the beautiful part of all of that is the power of God, the affirmation of the power of God. And whenever, think about it in this respect, whenever we are told to do something, we just must submit. Verse 14.
Yeah.
He performs what is appointed for me. God will do what God will do. And Job has resigned himself to that. Now, again, I think a lot of people today try to emphasize a lot about the idea that they're trying to talk to God, or God wanting God to talk to them about which way their life should go and what decisions they should make. I think sometimes we want God to walk with us every step of the way and not make any mistakes whatsoever. And the thing is we don't learn that way. When a baby is beginning to walk, that baby's going to stumble and fall. Give it about another 3 or 4 months, and that baby's running all over the place, but that baby's still going to stumble and fall whenever there's something in the way. And we still stumble and fall. Babes in Christ, we committed a lot of sins before we became Christians, and so immediately afterwards, we're going to stumble a lot.
Yeah.
Even those that have been in the church for years and are striving very hard to be the Christians they need to be, they're still going to stumble.
Yeah.
They're still going to stumble. And a lot of times, I speak for myself, when I stumble, I kind of beat myself up to the point that I say, well, I'm not worthy of anything. Well, that's not what God wants me to do. God wants me to learn from that mistake, pick myself up, go on, and not make the mistake again. And so the thing is, this is a real struggle that sometimes we deal with. And so the thing that Job is bringing out, and the thing that I think we need to concentrate on, is what happens to us is not blind chance.
Oh, yeah.
There's a plan. God had a plan for us, just like he had a plan for Job and Eliphaz and Bildad and every person on this planet. God has a plan. God will, at the same time as he has that plan, and we even think about it before the foundation of the world, they planned the plan where the salvation of men might happen through the death of Jesus on the cross, and we might be able to live with him forevermore in heaven, which is what God wants.
Yeah.
At the same time, that plan is the ultimate plan that he's trying to get all humans to. He also gives us enough rope, and he loves us enough to allow us to make our own decisions so that it will not be forced upon us as much as it's something that we want to do.
Yeah, I was going to make that point to say that, yes, God has a plan for our lives at the end result, but it doesn't remove the fact that we have choices to make, and that we do make choices, and while God has an ultimate plan for us, we can move away from that plan, but ultimately he wants us to be saved. Yeah, eternally. Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So he's saying he performed the thing that is appointed for me. God will do what God's going to do, and I'm going to resign myself to that. And so the thing is it's not blind chance. So the thing is many such things are with him. Did Job think that God had more trials for him? Possibly. He'd been through enough, and he was possibly thinking to himself, well, if that's the case, then I may as well go ahead and resign myself to whatever else I've got to face. Mm-hmm. And so, that's what kind of seems to be what's going on with the context here in verse 14, where he says, he performs what is appointed for me, and many such things are with him. And that's the reason why I'm terrified at his presence. I'm afraid of what's going to happen next. It can't get any worse than what it is right now. And yet it has for Job. And he is now just to the point where he just gives up. And so I'm troubled at his presence. I'm afraid of him. Job realizes God is almighty and awe-inspiring, and he knows God will do what he plans. And so what else, God, do you have in store for me? What else do you have in store for me? So he struggles with this. He's understanding this. He's saying, okay, what else do I need to do? Going on to verse 15, I'm terrified. When I consider this, I'm afraid of him. And he says, I'm awestruck, for God makes my heart soft, weak. I like the New King James Version there better. Weak. And the Almighty troubles me because I was not cut off before the darkness. Whenever we really think about God, Whenever we sit down and study everything the Bible has to say about God, we actually have a course here, the Godhead, and how God worked out our salvation through that. But if we were to sit down and write down everything we could know about God, if we would look up every passage that talks about God, his power, his strength, his wisdom, his knowledge, his omniscience, and in fact, years ago, I never will forget, whenever I was going to International Bible College, I went to a professor's class, and I can't even remember, I don't want to say it's the Godhead, but I'm not sure. And he gave us something like 300 verses, all typed up. Now, just the verses. Our homework was to look up every verse and write out those verses, especially when it's dealing with whatever particular aspect of God that we're talking with. I've still got that in my office at home. And many times I'll pull that out just to remind myself of God's omniscience, omnipotence, his love, his passion, his creation. I mean, there was, like I said, 13, and we're talking legal size paper.
Oh, wow.
Probably 100 or more verses that we had to write out. And I never have forgotten that. And a lot of times I'll stop and try to go back and reread some of that to remind me of how great God is.
You don't plan to do that to us, though?
No. This is not the class on the Godhead. Maybe if I teach the class on the Godhead again, I might do that. Okay. But I do. You're going to learn it a lot better whenever you have to look up every one of those passages that way.
Yeah.
And again, all he was really wanting us to point out was, what does this passage say about God specifically? I don't want you to copy the whole passage out. I want you just to tell me what this passage is saying about God. And wow, that was a revelation to me. I never have forgotten that. And many times, as I said, I will go back and pull it out. And I have tried to do this at South and some other places where I preach. I think it would be a good thing for every church member to sit out and write that stuff out.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, you would have a greater appreciation from God. So again, when we get back, he says, I'm terrified at his presence. He said, I'm afraid of him, verse 15. And so he's so awestruck. He said, God has what? Made my heart weak, and the Almighty terrifies me. Whenever we consider the plans of God and ourselves in relation to it, he's overawed. I have in my mind what I think is going to happen on Judgment Day.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen that way.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And the thing is that I want to know exactly how it's going to work out. I see pictures, read books where, you're going to stand before the judgment bar of God to hear your sentence. And I, a lot of times, I guess, picture Perry Mason and standing before the judge there, or something along that line, somebody defending me. That's not that odd of a picture. I could see Satan on one hand, the prosecuting attorney will sit down and list every sin I've ever committed. Mm-hmm. And Jesus, the defense attorney, says, now, Father, and just think about that for just a minute, Father, Tommy has committed all these sins, but he was baptized into Christ at the age of 13, and he has tried to live the life that he needs to live, though, Lord, sometimes he gets tired. Jesus got tired. That's comforting to me. And Father, my blood's covering his sins. And I visualize that God, the judge, says, not guilty, come on in.
Yeah.
It's not because I'm a preacher, and it's not because I'm a Christian, but it's because of what Jesus did for me on the cross. And it's because that since that time, I have tried in my own imperfect way to walk with God and to do what he wants me to do. Sometimes the biggest struggles I have are doing everything he wants me to do to the best of my ability. because I'm a man. I get tired, and we get worn out and burned out sometimes, you know. But that's a beautiful thought. So Job is sitting here saying, you know, I want to go to his tribunal, but at the same time, I'm afraid of him because I'm afraid of what he's going to do. And so that's where he's struggling in all of this. He has not shrunk in any command from God. He's tried to do it all to the best of his ability. He's hid up the word like a treasure. And he says, I want it more than my necessary food. So he goes on and he says, he's of one mind. He's unique. What can make him change? Whatever his soul desires, that's what he's going to do. So in verses 6 through 12, Job had hoped that God would allow him to plead his cause, but now here it kind of returns to the complaining about his situation. God has not yet called him to the tribunal. He knows that God will not change. And so what's going to wind up happening is he's not going to have any other choice but to simply submit to what God has done.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And that's not an encouraging situation as he continues to struggle with the fever and everything else that he's having to deal with physically and then emotionally and spiritually.
Yeah.
Every part of his psyche has been attacked in one way or another.
Sorry, brother. That's why in Job's mind, he just wants a reason. He just wants an answer. Then possibly he could better deal with it. But to be going, if you even put ourselves in this present situation, we might be having an illness or an ailment, and we're suffering, and we go to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, we've tried everything. It's not terminal, but we've tried everything. We don't know why this is happening. We can't account. It does have an effect on us. So I guess it's the same way that this suffering now is having on Job. He just wants to know why. Yeah.
That's it. If we know why, then we might be able better to deal with what, right? If I know the why, then we'll be able to be dealing with the what much better. So he says, you know, not only that, but after all Job's been through, there's always also that nagging question in the back of his mind, what next? You know,
yeah.
And it's just to the point to where what next? And so he would even go so far as to say, I'm ready to die just to get out of this. But what next? You know, and I think that may be something else that's going on here. He's just struggling with it. He troubles me. The verb says, one way to translate the Hebrew is he hath filled me with horror and consternation. What else am I going to have to suffer? And so he complains, verse 17, I was not cut off from the presence of darkness. So darkness is still around me. I'm still here. I'm not dead. And he did not hide deep darkness from my face. So he said, you know what? I feel all of these calamities upon me. Everything that's going on, my friends have come and accused me of everything in the world. And I still don't know that this is the end of the story. If this is all, then it's bad. It's horrible. But if there's more to come, I can't deal with it. I can't handle it. I'm done. I'm done. And he complains that in essence, as a righteous man, God did not protect him and shelter him from the dark days. And you may have heard, you may remember this a few years ago, there was and it's out there, there's a poem called The Footprints in the Sand.
Oh, yes, right, yeah.
You know, and that beautiful thing where they're walking together, and then all of a sudden, this man is suffering a lot of times, and he can't figure out what's going on, and he finally gets to heaven and says, Lord, why? And he says, well, I was carrying you the whole time.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful picture. And it's a picture that Job needed to see, or at least needed, because again, he had not heard from God. He had heard from his friends. He didn't know if there was something else around the next corner or not. And I can imagine how not only was he going through what he was going through? But in the back of his mind, he's about to say, what next? A lot of us have that attitude. I know we shouldn't, but we're just being honest. A lot of us should have that attitude. When things are bad, we always start looking for more and more and more things.
Yeah.
Happen. And so maybe that's where he's coming from in that respect. So we go on in chapter 24. He says, since the times are not hidden from the Almighty, he says, God knows the time of my judgment and wrath. He knows this beforehand. So in essence, chapter 24, verse 1, he's saying, he asked God why. Job asked why God does not allow those who know him to see the days of judgment of wrath upon the wicked. And I think that's what he's trying to bring out going on into chapter 24. He stresses this. He said this before in chapter 21, 12 through 14. Job admitted that God saw the evil deeds, but the problem he has is, why hasn't God done something about it?
Yeah.
And that's it. So actually here, beginning in chapter 24, he starts, like his friends in a sense, complaining about all the bad things that are happening on this earth. He says, some remove landmarks. They seize flocks violently and feed on them. And they drive away the donkey of the fatherless. They take the widow's ox as a pledge. They push the needy off the road. All the poor of the land are forced to hide. Like wild donkeys in the desert, they go out to their work searching for food. The wilderness yields food for them and for their children. They gather their fodder in the field, glean in the vineyard of the wicked. They spend the night naked without clothing and have no covering in the cold. They're wet with showers of the mountains and huddle around the rock for want of shelter. So what are these guys? He's describing some of these wicked people. He says, God, why haven't you done something about these wicked people? In a sense, Job is, as he's talking to his friends as well as God, he's saying, God, my friends have been making the point that I deserve this punishment. Why is it that we do see some of these things? Why is it that it does seem like the wicked prosper? Why is it that it does seem like the rich get richer and the poor get poorer? Why is it that we struggle here on this earth when we are your servants? Why don't you just call an end to it all? So you see, I like what he's saying here. So what were some of the things he was saying? Number one, he says some of them remove landmarks. I grew up on a farm in Alabama. We had fences. We knew where the property line was, and we built fences all the way around it. Back in those days, there was no fences. There was no barbed wire fences, hog wire fences to mark out the boundaries. In other words, it would really depended upon knowing the pillar of stones that everybody would agree to would be the property line, or the property, the place where the property lines come together. Now, what would happen in those situations, a lot of the dishonest thieves could move the pillars. And this became a crime of great multitude. Moses in Deuteronomy had prophesied again and again, you shall not remove the landmarks. So as he begins to complain about the violence of the earth, Job is saying, all right, let's stop for just a moment. Think about these people that are moving the landmarks. And then they seize the flocks away violently. They drive away the flocks. They make other flocks a part of their own. Picture cattle rustlers in the old cowboy westerns, okay? Picture cattle rustlers or sheep stealers or something along that line. That's exactly what he says. He says, these people are being dishonest. And again, Moses condemned this in Deuteronomy 27:17. Again, in Deuteronomy 19, verse 14. And the proverb writer in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 28 and 23, verse 10, mentions this of removing their landmarks. And so he goes on. He says, they take no pain in concealing what they've done. They make the robbery public. They don't care if anybody comes after them. Goes on verse 3 and 4. They drive away the donkey of the fatherless and take the widow's ox as pledge, and they push the needy off the road, and the poor of the land are forced to hide. You think about the idea that the first group that he starts talking about here in verse 3 are the fatherless. That's the most unprotected group that there is. Often all that the fatherless may have or some useful animal, and then the wicked come up and steal the animal. Crimes against orphans were and are considered to be crimes of the greatest multitude. Like chapter 22, verse 9, he says this, you have sent widows away empty, and the strength of the fatherless are crushed. So we understand that Eliphaz references this. Job just goes back and repeats what he says and said, yeah, you're right. There are some people that do that. They rob orphans. They take the widow's ox for a pledge. She was dependent upon her ox to till the ground. And then the wicked would take it away because of payment of a debt. Again, I find that interesting. Whenever me and my wife have an opportunity to sit home and watch TV, we watch old Westerns. And I know I've told you that a couple, 3 times. But the thing that I see is how often, as I'm reading through the Bible, I see stories portrayed that way of them taking or leaving a poor widow woman with nothing. And she's out there on the prairie, could be attacked by Indians, could be attacked by robbers, could be attacked by anything and everybody. And this poor woman is just trying to eke out a living somehow, some way or another. Think about again how often that the Bible talks about wicked men taking advantage of widows and orphans. Exodus 22 verse 22, Deuteronomy 24:17, Deuteronomy 27:19, Psalms 94 verse 6, Isaiah 1 at verse 23, 10 at verse 2, Jeremiah 5:28, Zechariah 7 verse 10. I know I went through that quickly, but you'll get the video so you can get those passages later. They turn the needy out of the way. The wicked force the needy out of the highway and make the road so dangerous to travel that the needy seeks the byways for safety. But the problem with the byways is that's where the robbers are. They push everybody else out of the way so that they can get what they want. And so the poor of the earth hide themselves together, verse 5, or verse 4 and 5. Verse 4, he says, 24:4. They push the needy off the road. All the poor of the land are forced to hide. So again, there's that idea. They hide together. There's no rich friends. They're forced to associate so that maybe they can have some defense in numbers. And he said, in all of this, Job said, the proud man is not punished. He gets away with it. Verse 5, like wild donkeys in the desert, they go out to their work searching for food. Well, what do? They're searching food from these marauders, or the marauders are searching them from these poor people. Okay. He says, verse 5, he says, like wild donkeys in the desert, they go out and work searching for food. The wilderness yields food for them and their children. So the idea of these trying to pray, they go to their work, they go to plunder, they think about them circling a wagon train, stealing whatever they can out of the wagon train, leaving everybody burning to death or dying one way or another. Many times, many of the wagon trains, or the caravans as it was, would rise early in the morning so as to travel before the heat of the day. And then they would also sometimes travel in the night. And they would the marauders, these evil people would swoop down on them to steal something. The wilderness, he says, the desert, is another way to look at it, yields food for them and for their children. Isaiah 35 verse 1. Plunder. They obtain sustenance by plunder. And again, what Job is saying here is they're doing this with impunity. Nobody's punishing them for this. God does not punish them. I believe he's going to understand that God's going to punish them later, but he says, right here, right now, it's not happening. You have been saying all along that I'm wicked, and that's the reason why I'm suffering the way I am. And Job is saying, let me give you examples of folks that go through this and are wicked, and we know but for a fact that they're wicked, but they're not suffering in the least little bit. That's his whole point. He said they reap everyone as corn in the field. Even though these marauders, when they do not plunder, they go into the fields others have sown. And they use their provender for their horses, their cows. You know, you got to have corn, you got to have grain for your cattle, you got to have grain for your horses. You've got to have, you know, and what's interesting about all of this is it's amazing sometimes how I was talking to a widow lady not too long ago, and this widow woman for years has put in one of the finest gardens you can ever possibly imagine. She has a fence around her yard. She has a fence around the garden. This year, she usually brings me more stuff than I could ever possibly eat. And I appreciate her so much. And I do everything I can to help her in every way that I can. This year, she has had more people steal stuff out of her garden than any other time that she can ever remember.
Oh, whoa.
Huh?
I'm saying, oh, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. This last year that, you know, we're talking about last summer, whenever she put that garden in, she has had more stuff stolen from them than ever in any time in her life. She knows where some of them are stealing it. She knows that there are some Hispanics that are going in there and getting it. And she said, you know, Tommy, she said, if they come and ask me for it, I wouldn't mind if they picked it. He said, I wouldn't mind that at all. It's just the fact they have to go in there and do it and steal it from me. I appreciate her heart because, like I said, this one lady fed people. You just don't know. I can't even begin to tell you. The Lord knows about this. And this is what I think about her every time I think about it. The Lord knows her, how many foods she has prepared for those that are sick, how many times she has sat with other widows, how many other times she has sat with sick children. I mean, this lady epitomizes the godly woman of Proverbs chapter 31. To me, Proverbs 31, I could give you a name for this lady. And people were stealing from her. And it's just, and she said, I'd be more than happy to give it to them. I'd probably even more than happy to pick it for them. Wow, just wow. And so they are going through all of this, picking all the grapes and everything. They don't labor for it. It's not like they put in those hours of sweat and toil. They just go in there and take it. He goes on to verse 7. They cause the naked to lodge without clothing. They have no covering in the cold. Now, going back to chapter 22, whenever Eliphaz was making arguments against Job, he says, you have taken pledges from your brother for no reason and stripped the naked of their clothing. So Job is answering that. He emphasizes the idea, no, that's not the case. He says, that's not the case. I know what I've been doing, and I know how I have been blessing others by my efforts. So we go on, let's see, where was I? It was verse 7 of chapter 24. Yeah. All right, yeah. Let's see. I lost my place here. Yeah. Okay, there it is. There it is. Okay, verse 8. Okay, verse 8 of chapter 24. They are wet with the mountains of the showers of the mountains and huddle around the rock for want of shelter. The poor, the ones that the thieves have stolen from, are wet with the quick and sudden rainstorms that often come. They've been driven from their shelters. They have nothing. They find these little caves. They embrace the rock. There might be a little bit of shelter from the rain somewhere or another. Bring it to the 21st century. We're talking about the homeless. They have nothing. And again, as Christians, we have a responsibility to do what we can to help provide shelter. And we need to do a much better job at it. Verses 9 through 11, some snatch the fatherless from the breast and take a pledge from the poor. I think there he's talking about the idea of, could have two possible meanings. possibly of kidnapping children and selling them into slavery. And we sit back and shake our heads and say, no, that can't happen. But all we've got to think about is the sex slavery that's going on in our country right now. And it's happening. And it's still going on, and it's not being stopped. Again, it's a lucrative business. Sometimes at that time, the creditor would take a child in payment of a debt, and then that child would be sold into slavery a little bit later on when it was big enough to help do the work in the fields, etc. So he says, go ahead.
Yes. I'm just making a comment that thinks you would think that you're talking about the 21st century.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah,
you actually are. And we're talking, as I said before, we don't know exactly when it was written, but maybe as early as 800 BC, you know. Yeah, it's same song, second verse. Same song, second verse. So he goes on and he says they take a pledge of the poor. Again, they would take what was necessary for comfort of the poor and retain it. A lot of times, and Jesus himself would say something about this, they would take the garments of the poor as well as other things. And that's the reason why in the Old Testament, as well as the New, God would emphasize the idea that every night you give that man his cloak back so that he will not be sleeping or trying to sleep and shivering. You give that man his cloak back. They would cause him to go naked without clothing. Remember Exodus 22, verse 6, Deuteronomy 24, 12, and 13, both bring out that idea. He says, verse 4, where am I now? They take away the donkey of the fatherless. They take the widow's ox as a pledge. They push the needy off the road. The poor of the land are forced to hide. Okay. The hungry are forced to carry the sheaf of wheat for the wicked, but the wicked do not give them one thing out of that wheat to help them to feed on. The Old Testament law, Deuteronomy 35, verse 4, said, you shall not muzzle the ox that treads out the corn. But these wicked people would not allow their fellow humans to enjoy it. And again, think about how they would be hungry and they would have done anything to be able just to have some of that wheat, some of that rye, some of that whatever it is, the barley, whatever it was, and so that they could grate it and make some bread out of it, and they wouldn't be allowed to get it. Yeah. And Job is sitting back wondering, why is it that these rich people that use people this way, why is it they're not being punished? You're saying that the wicked are always going to be punished, and you're blaming me, and you're saying to me that I deserve that. But why isn't there consistency across the board? Why is God choosing to punish certain people and not others? How many times have we heard that argument used? It seems like God does use or punish certain people at certain times and other people don't. He says, going on, he says there in verse 9 through 11, he says, they press out oil within their walls and tread wine presses, yet suffer thirst. They put all these wine presses in there. They press out the oils for olives for light. They tread their wine presses for wine, but they're not allowed to enjoy any of their labors. The poor cannot even slake their thirst as they tread the wine presses. And again, without going into a lot of detail, a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about the idea of wine. But again, if they were crushing the fruit of the grapes, it would not be, even though it would be called wine, it was not wine as we understand it, not fermented beverages as much as it's what? It's more the idea of grape juice. And a lot of people, you know, they misunderstand that as they read through this, and they automatically assume that it's what we understand to be wine. So he says the poor can't even slake their thirst by the wine presses. They just have to work. And there's no relief. There's no hope for them. So he goes on. Verse 12, the dying groan in the city. The souls of the wounded cry out. yet God does not charge them with wrong. He's talked about those who suffered in the deserts and some other remote place, but now he thinks about where even in the cities, men groan because of the oppression of the wicked. Again, think about our culture today. Sometimes the greatest suffering in the world happen in inner cities. The biggest struggles that people have are in the inner cities. They take guns and so forth and shoot things out, and a lot of times they'll try to have drugs just to be able to, in some cases, eat something. Or they take drugs to try to
just to survive.
To survive or to forget
the
life that they're living right now. And all the money that the U.S. government's throwing at it's not solving it. The only thing that's ever going to solve that problem is changing people's lives. And the only thing that can do that is the gospel. I believe that with all my heart. And we, as the church, need to be leading that, not the government. And I'm just saying that that's the way it ought to be. We ought to be the ones that's helping people to the very best of our ability.
And we should see those opportunities to help.
Yeah. A lot of times we're blind to that, aren't we?
Yeah.
And a lot of times we're blind to it. Secondly, a lot of times we're not just blind to it, but we find excuses not to do it. It's interesting. Today, I got a voicemail when I entered the office. And so I was listening to the voicemail, and this lady called. She says, yeah, I need help with my utilities. I said, okay. So I called her back up, and I said, well, what exactly do you need? She said, I need help with my utilities. I said, okay, where do you live? She said, I live in Albany, Georgia. And she's calling Atlanta churches. I said, why aren't you calling some of the churches there around Albany? Well, they said they can't help me. And I'm like, really? Huh. And I was thinking about some of the churches down in Albany. And of course, she may be one of these that's all she's wanting is the money. You know what I'm trying to
say? Yeah.
We struggle with that a lot. I struggle with that a lot. You know, the Bible does say in the book of 2 Thessalonians, I think, if a man will not work, neither should he eat. But he's mainly referring to Christians there. So he's saying, in essence, that the church's responsibility is not to take care of those that won't work. And I think specifically to Christians. But what about the other folks out in the world? Are we supposed to become the social services for everybody? Is the government solving the problem? Not really. They give out food stamps and so forth. But again, and I think about, especially in a time like we're going through right now, where prices have gone sky high.
Yeah.
It seems like that no matter what, gas prices, as a result of that, food prices, and so forth. And sometimes we all sit back as Christians, and we know we ought to be doing some more, but to what extent? How far? Back in the days, from what I've been told of the Depression, at least, if you were out there working, your neighbors would try to help you, just like you would help them. But for some reason or another, we've not brought that over today. It's all about us. It's all about what we want, about wanting it right now. So I just use that as an example. Is she calling all the churches from Albany up in Atlanta, trying to get some help because the churches down there won't? It's troubling to me. And I will also say this, and I want somebody to really kind of help me with this. As a preacher, I've been struggling with this all the time that I've been a preacher, because every congregation I have ever dealt with always has people that are in need. What do? Do you just pass out the money? Well, most of the churches that I've dealt with say, no, we're not going to pass out money because we don't know what they're going to spend it on. Well, that's true. All right. So if it's the middle of winter, you're going to help somebody pay their electric bill to keep warm, yeah, that should be even idea to do that. There should be no problems whatsoever. Gas bill to stay warm, yeah. Do they sometimes need food? Every church that I know of has a food pantry. We do. Every year, right around Thanksgiving and Christmas, at South Cobb, we get the names of people that the schools are giving us as they deal with these children that are coming in, and understanding that they don't have a lot of food. And so we get the names of the children and the families, and we give them enough food to last for right around Thanksgiving and Christmas. We give them enough food to last for about a week and a half anyway.
Yeah.
But again, those you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, those are opportunities that we should grab. And sometimes what we need to educate them as well. Perhaps they're not managing their monetary things. Perhaps they might just don't know how to. They can't make it meet. So we need to see it as a part of our job to say, well, these are some ways that you can make things work for you. We need to be, as we give, we need to educate as well. I feel that way.
Right. And I think that's what needs to happen. I feel sometimes that it's sad that we only really do it as a matter of outreach around Christmas and Thanksgiving. But that's not to say somebody can't come in here and get something out of our pantry. And there are many times, and it seems like at South Cobb anyway, it comes in spurts. We might go for months without anybody coming, and then all of a sudden we'll have about 4 or 5. And that's, I guess what I'm trying to say, this is one thing that I've always struggled with as a preacher, as an elder, as a deacon, somebody that's trying to serve in this respect. How do we do the education? And what can we do? And hopefully we're using this as a means of contact where we can share with the gospel with them. But it is something that we need to think about and I think need to do better.
Yes, I agree.
So I'm open for suggestions, brother. I'm open for every suggestion in the world so that we can figure it out and figure out the best way to do it. I don't know that we're going to be sending from Atlanta. I don't know we're going to be sending money down to Albany for that. But you see my point. I thought it was really odd that she would have to call all the way up here.
Yeah. Possibly to one of the leaders there, or direct her or something like that, because she might just make a blanket statement like that, and it's not really,
That's right.
Yeah.
And it may be that she has worn out her welcome among all the other churches down there. I don't know. So it's a struggle.
Yeah. I can understand that.
It is. All right. So as we're looking about this, you see, these are the people that are stealing from the poor. They're stealing from the poor. As far as I know, we've never stole from the poor, but on the flip side, this is where people will go. And I think Job is mentioning this to really put out the idea, look, this is where we are. This is where we're struggling with right now. And he says, I don't understand why these people can steal from the poor and not be punished. And he says, so if we're going to sit down and talk about justice, and we're going to sit down and talk about what we deserve, I want to talk to God about, God, why are you allowing the robber to continue to steal from the widow woman and her children? Why are you allowing children to be sold into sex slavery? Why are you allowing? And of course, for the Christian, the answer to me is, it's not harvest time yet. God's going to make it all right. I don't know how he is, but that's his job. It's not mine. I just have to try to do the very best I can while I'm still here. That's it. So he goes on in verses 9 through 11. They snatched the fatherless from the breast, take a pledge from the poor. They cause the poor to go naked without clothing. Take away the sheaves from the hungry. They press out the oils. They tread the wine presses. And the dying groan in the city. The souls of the wounded cry out. Yet God does not charge them with wrong. And that's the whole point that he's been trying to get to eventually. You know, the wicked are forcing the poor to work hard, but they're not getting anything out of it. Men are groaning. They're suffering. He's not talking about those who are suffering in the deserts and from some remote place, but even the cities because of the oppression that's going on there. And he says, verse 13, there are those who rebel against the light. They do not know its way nor abide in its path. Men groan from the city. We can hear about it. And he says, you know what? The wicked people in the cities aren't in any way controlled by those out in the country, but those in the cities work at night and they're doing their crimes at night. All these things come into play there. I think about the ideal again of the inner cities and what we have to face and the problems they have to face on a day in and day out basis. And they're just struggling to make it day in and day out. And that's a tragedy. And Job is saying, you know, Lord, what about all these people? Another thing that really sticks out to my mind as I'm reading this is this was a problem in Job's day. And it's still a problem today. And you'd think with all of our wisdom and knowledge that we would have had this all figured out, but now we're going to something else. But we're not. And I think it goes back to the ideal of sin.
Yeah.
Job struggles with why the rich aren't being punished right now, just like his three friends do.
Yeah.
But why is that? Why is that? Verse 14, the murderer rises with the light. He kills the poor and needy in the night. He's like a thief. So he's rebelling against the light. So like as an illustration, he goes back earlier. He says, those who rebel against the light. Okay, let me give you an example. The murderer. The murderer. All right. He rises with the dawn when men are sometimes the soundest asleep. A lot of times the poor are getting up at the crack of dawn because they have to work all day long. And so the murderer might attack the poor on his way to work. In the night, he's like a thief. And again, the same man who commits murder will steal. And again, Job's implication is that God knows all this, yet God does not punish. So you're blaming me and you're charging me with all of this, but let's look at see what it's way it really is. Verse 15, the eye of the adulterer waits for the twilight, saying, no eye will see me. And he disguises his face in the dark night. They break into houses, which they've marked for themselves in the daytime. They do not know the light, for the morning is the same to them as the shadow of death. If someone recognizes them, they're in the terrors of the shadow of death. Now he goes from the idea of, talks about the adulterer. And again, no eye just sees me, you know. I'm going to go out at night where nobody's going to see me, and I'm going to be able to get away with all of this. And it's interesting, as Job is talking about it, these men hate moral light. In other words, they hate what the Bible says about the way they live their lives. They hate physical light because they don't want nobody to see them engaged in it. And again, Job is implying that these wicked men get away with the depths of their depravity, and God is not punishing the adulterer right now. Now, again, we know that there's coming a day, right? But the thing we've got to realize is that God doesn't do it right now. And this is one of the biggest struggles that Job is having here.
You know, brother, it reminds me of the song, Tempted and Tried, where it talks about, we wonder, why is it that people, the song goes, living so wicked,
right?
So wicked year after year. But the assurance in the song is that we will understand it better by and by.
That's right.
You know, rather long we'll understand it. Some things, I think sometimes though, it's not in our purview to understand things now. But that maybe as we mature, as we grow, and possibly even in eternal life, it will become clearer to us. And I think possibly that is what, to me, Job is sort of wrestling with now. He just can't understand what is happening, but of course, he will be rewarded and come to a better understanding afterwards.
That's right. That's right. So everything you're saying is that we will understand it by and by. And again, Job, though, is just making the point. God doesn't punish them now. God doesn't punish them now. Verse 16, they dig through houses, which they've marked for themselves. Now, again, remember, at this time, a lot of the places people live were adobe huts made out of sand or something with a little bit of mud. Windows, a lot of times, if there were any windows, were high up to let the heat out of the house during the middle of the day. So a lot of times, whenever the thief was wanting to break in, he would know what house to dig into. They dig through the houses. So they would, remove a few bricks, remove a little bit of mud. They would be guilty of burglary. And that what they had done is, as we would say it today in modern 2022 parlance, the burglars cased out the house before they broke in, right? They cased it out, what we could get, They looked for the easiest place to dig through. And again, during the daytime, the burglar may very well putting himself up in the house where nobody can find him. And so whenever all the lights go out, he gets what he wants. He's out of the house and has stolen something from him. Okay. So verse 17, the morning is the same to them as the shadow of death. If someone recognizes them, they're in the terrors of the shadow of death. So the thing that these burglars will do, they do it at night. Evil men love these darkness, right? They do it at night. And then they have, the thing is, he said they do this in the morning, right before the morning light when it's the darkest at all. So the ideal is he's swift as the waters. Their portion is cursed in the earth. He does not behold the way of the vineyards. Again, it seems to be the talking about thieves of water. You got to remember, they didn't have water piped to their house like we do nowadays. They didn't take it for granted. They would get in boats silently and swiftly, or he might be talking about the stealth and speed in which a robber or burglar steals other possessions. It doesn't take long. Think about the ideal of, for us especially in our culture, we often talk about the shoplifter and how in no time flat, they've got something, they're out the door. Nobody stops them. So again, he's worried about stealth. He's worried about somebody catching him and possibly paying for it. And he says they get things they do have. And that's the way he says they continue on. Verse 18, the swift on the face of the waters, their portion should be cursed in the earth. No one will turn into the way of their vineyards. So their thief do not behold the way of the vineyards. They don't spend time. Thieves do not spend time out in the fields unless they're sentenced to hard labor in some field somewhere in Louisiana or something like that, where they have to bear the heat of the day.
But then they'll be prisoners and not thieves.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Okay.
And they didn't want that whole situation either, did they?
No.
Notice verse 19, he changes again. As drought and heat consume the snow waters, the grave consumes those who have sinned. You see kind of a change in Job's speech here. The drought, the heat slowly takes the waters. The wicked man plunders, and they slowly and silently disappear by death. They're not cut off suddenly. They're not punished right now. Now remember what his three friends have been saying. You did this. You did wrong. You repent. Then things will be better for you. And Job is saying, look, these folks they're like snow water. The wicked die in the same feeble manner as the snow water perishes. They don't die calm and peaceful deaths. Nobody's going to kill them. Again, he's making very broad statements. I'm sure there would probably those that would try to defend whatever they had at that moment in time. Verse 20 says what? The womb should forget him. The worm should feed sweetly on him. He should be remembered no more. Nobody's going to remember him anymore. And wickedness should be broken like a tree. Now, he said, if there's any punishment, Job, I think, is saying if there's any punishment whatsoever, it's not like what I'm going through. The womb shall forget him suggests the idea that his own mother would forget him. The ideal is not in a sad manner. It's just, the wicked man dies and is buried, and there's no one there to whenever he's being buried, there's no sorrow, there's no shame. He's just like everybody else. His death will not be ignominious. In other words, it's not like you're going to read about him in the paper because he was electrocuted to death in the electric chair. It'll be just like everybody else's. There will be no hint of divine displeasure for what the wicked man did while he was alive. You see, this is what Job is saying. He said, when the wicked man dies, you're not going to tell he's really all that wicked. And if you do, he's not going to die, and he's not going to have to suffer like I'm having to suffer. But there's no stigma attached to it. So, verse 21, he preys on the barren who do not bear, and does no good for the widows. He picks up again how the wicked man is, how God does not punish in the here and now. Again, one of the worst things that could happen to women in that century was if they were barren. And again, the wicked man does nothing to help or support women who have no children to support her. So think about a poor widow woman, has no children, nobody to support her. She's eking out a living, literally, to doing the very best that she can. And the thing is that in all of this, who's suffering? Think about it. Well, the widow woman's suffering, right? But not the wicked. The wicked man has control over a lot of things. And when that man turns against you, you have no promise for your life, is what he says in verse 22. So he says, the wicked man does not do anything to support the women, and he does not do good to the widow. He draws the mighty with his power. He rises up, and no man is sure of life. He's talked about the wicked man and how he preyed upon the sick, weak, helpless. And now he talks about how even the mighty man is helpless when it comes to the wicked man's power and strength. It could have reference to the fact that the wicked man is able to buy the mighty. Think about how a lot of times that's true too, right? He attracts them to power by the power that he already has. And a lot of our shows on television will talk about crooked politicians, crooked police officers, we could go on and on and on and on and on. That's the world we live in. That's the sinful world that we're living in. He says, verse 23, well, wait a minute. He preys on the barren that do not bear. But God draws the mighty away with his power. He rises up, and no man is sure of him. He gives them security. What's he given? The wicked man is living a life as it was, as Job is looking at it, as safety. He's secure in his wrongdoing. He has a life of tranquility and peace. The man rests on this and does well, yet his eyes are always on either what God knows what they're doing and will be punishing them in due time, or God knows what they're doing and he will take care of them. But then he says what? They're exalted for a little while, then they're gone. They're brought low, taken out of the way like the others. They dry out like the heads of grain. And what Job is all saying here is these guys have lived their entire lives sinning, taking from others, stealing from the poor, making it hard for the poor to get anything. These men have lived their lives, and we give example. And Job possibly may have, as he was saying these things, may have been thinking of some people that he could have said, this is the one, this is somebody does this. Did he have specific people in mind? When you get in detail and see, as you read through this, when you get in detail and see his description of them, obviously He has people in mind of what he's talking about. And he says, what? They die. And that's it. They're exalted for a little while. And then they're brought low. They die like other men do. They're not the object of God's displeasure. It's not like God struck them dead because of their sins. They're just kind of like cut off, like an ear of corn from the corn stalk, not cut down and brought low like he has been. And so verse 25, Job challenges them. And if it not be so now, who will make me a liar and make my speech worth nothing? Job has given his point. I want to talk to God. I see things the way they are. You have seen the same things. Who's going to challenge me? Who's going to dare call me a liar? He's probably, as I said a moment ago, given these facts, thinking of various people that this does fit. But Bildad is going to try to answer him. Yeah. In 6 verses, because he has nothing to say. Let's take a quick break, about 5 or 10 minutes. I got to do something for my throat here, and then we'll pick back up with chapter 25. All right?
Okay, no problem.
All right, brother. Okay, we're looking at chapter 25 now. This is Bildad's last speech. 6 verses. 6 verses. You know, and I think it's extremely that Job has been very forceful in his arguments. We noticed that Eliphaz, as well as Bildad and Zophar stopped after the second round of speeches. And the bottom line is now Bildad's talking, and Job is going to again bring out these points. He tries to answer it. He tries to answer what Job has said in chapters 23 and 24. And we've seen what he said. So let's see what he's trying to emphasize. That verses 1 through 3, dominion and fear belong to him. Him who? God. And he makes peace in the high places. Is there any number to his armies? Upon whom does his light not rise? How then can man be righteous before God? And how can he be pure who is born of a woman? If even the moon does not shine and the stars are not pure in his sight, how much less man, who is a maggot, and the son of man, who is a worm? Okay, let's look at this. Chapter 25, verses 1 through 3, the first thing he starts talking about is God's might and God's power. And he's already done this, as well as the others, as well as Job. Job will honestly admit to the power of God. But then in verses 4 through 6, he's going to talk about the universal sinfulness of man. Now, again, there's nothing wrong necessarily with that idea. Romans 3:10, also 3:23, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We make that point all the time. So now it seems like that as Bildad takes the floor, he tries to answer what Job has said, and it sure is a pitiful argument in any chance of the term. He obviously was saying, as he's been saying all along, Job, you must be wicked. So there's something that has to be said to Job's arguments, and it obviously runs like this. So God is so great and powerful and just that man cannot be just in his sight, but I can't answer why he doesn't punish all the wicked as he has punished you. And with that argument, he really doesn't have any argument whatsoever. So let's see what he says, verse 1 and 2. Dominion and fear are with him. God is powerful, has awesome right to rule. He is to be regarded with reverence. He is sovereign. He is majestic. He is God. And so, yes, God, dominion and fear does belong to him. And everything that we can say about the Bible, about what God tells us about the Bible, is the truth. We should, as Isaiah did in Isaiah 6, fall down before him all the time. He is worthy of all praise, glory, and honor. He is all knowing, all seeing, all hearing, all, you name it. He is a God of mercy, love, justice. He is a God that knows the end from the beginning. He is eternal. He made the heavens and the earth. He knows what keeps them going. He is the one that keeps them going. I mean, we can spend hours on this. And so, again, if I get that thing I was talking with you about, and if I can find it in my files, I'll just send you a copy of it, let you look at it for your own encouragement. Let me put it that way. Not that. All right.
Thank you.
And like I said, that would definitely preach. Bottom line is, he says what? He says, he makes peace in his high places. Again, to the armies of God in heaven. Think about the angels and think about how they work and do exactly what he wants them to do all the time. Often angels are banded together as a host, and they are often called God's armies. Okay. He asked the question, he said, is there any number to his armies? Upon whom does his light not rise? Again, think about the idea that God's light shines on all. Now at night, obviously, we don't see the light like we see during the daytime, but his glory is manifested upon every creature and all throughout the earth. All creatures are a reflection of God's glory and honor. Even the lowly worm, the lowly maggot, the microbes in the soil that breaks down, every one of them are doing exactly what God planned, designed, and wanted them to do. So again, God is great. He is powerful. There's nothing that can stop God from doing what he wants to do. And Job isn't going to argue with this in the least little bit. But again, it's not really, this is kind of a backhanded way. He's not really answering anything that Bildad's got to say. His answer, Bildad's answer, is not anything that Job couldn't agree with 100%. So are you just sitting there saying, well, you're righteous, but how can you be righteous realizing his power? How can he be pure who is born of a woman? Now, this seems to suggest the Calvinistic doctrine that we are born in sins. There are other passages that seem to suggest that. But more often than not, the main thing that we need to think about and key in on is that this should not be used from that, but the idea of that the child inherits the sins of the father. But he is making the statement that when men are born, are we really pure? Do we? Well, I think that we are as babes. A babe will be innocent. But as it continues to live in this world of sin, it's going to continue to do what every other human has done. It's going to sin. And that's how that's going to come about. So that's what he's emphasizing here.
Brother,
the glory and majesty of God. Can any man claim to be pure and clean like Job has done in Job chapter 14? You want to say?
Sorry, but so, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. I particularly like the question in verse 4. The first part of it that says, how then can man be right before God? And I think that's a question that Jesus answers. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a question that's answered in the New Testament.
Right.
That we can be right before God only in Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And so if we are baptized into him and live faithfully, then we'll be right. But then the point is, the next question, how can he who is born of woman be pure? Yeah, he can be pure in the sense that he remains in Christ and the blood of Christ continues to cleanse him from sin. I think, well, I just thought that those two questions would be appropriate for that.
And I think you're exactly right. Again, going back to the time frame and so forth, Jesus hadn't died yet. So they're trying to work all this out of their heads. And I think, as I said earlier, this is where some of the Calvinists get the idea that we are born into a world of sin, or that we actually inherit sin. And that's the point that I wanted to make sure that even at this point in this stage, that's what's Bildad's argument, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. Because we do know that, especially in other passages in the New Testament, you're right, that is not the case. Not the case. So that's the thing we need to think about. And I appreciate your point. But again, looking at it from Bildad and all these other viewpoints, they had no idea of a Messiah. They had no idea of what God was going to do through Jesus. And so they're still trying to work all that detail out without knowing what we know. And I thank God that we got the whole Bible, obviously, because we have the end of the story. We have the solution to the problem. We have the ultimate solution to the problem. And our job as Christians are to help others to see the solution to the problem of sin. So that's it. Oh Lord, please help me to do a better job helping others to see this. Verse 5, he said, even if the moon did not shine and the stars are not pure in his sight, how much less man who is a maggot and a son of man who is a worm. Boy, you're really getting down with it there, aren't you? I mean, think about that for a moment. In light of God's majesty and glory, can any man claim to be pure and clean? No. And again, Bildad is not answering Job's argument. Bildad is just making the very same point that Job himself has made. What? Man is wicked, but not every wicked person will be punished in this life. And we cannot assume that just because a person is going through punishment, trials, tribulations, and hardships that we cannot even begin to imagine, that does not necessarily mean that they are sinners. Many godly men and women have lost children, lost jobs. And the thing that we've got to think about and continue to meditate on is that God is with us. And that, again, is what we're trying to bring out. So we ask again, he said, if the sun and the moon retreat in glory compared to God, in other words, compared to God, if the moon does not shine and the stars are not pure in his sight, and they can't be because it's just a reflection of his glory, how much should sinful man? Man is nothing more than a worm, he says. Earlier in chapter 4, verse 19, man is compared to a moth. So here's a worm, not just any worm, but worms that feed upon putrid things. He's talking about a maggot, okay? Much less man, who is a maggot, and a son of man, who's a worm. Now, Bildad is not answering anything that Job said. He just keeps repeating the argument. Man is sinners, and Job wasn't arguing that. But what Job was trying to get across is, I haven't done anything to deserve what I have gone and am going through. And that's where that comes into play. All right. Now, let me see very quickly. Is there anything else I want to say about that? One thing that I did not mention earlier is that as he illustrates the greatness of God, he's comparing the greatness of God and the worthlessness of man. And he alternates between heavenly bodies and humanity. So you have the vastness of God's angelic army and the inability of man to stand before God. We can't stand before God in and of and by ourselves. That's true. But if the heavenly bodies, if the angels are not pure, then what about us as men? We can't be pure either. So Bildad is trying to make an argument that no man is just before God, and therefore it's futile for Job to say he's righteous. Man is nothing more to God than a maggot. Thank you, Bildad. We appreciated that encouragement there, right?
But that's Bildad's straw man, because Job already accepts that.
Yeah, that's right.
Job already accepts that.
Job already agrees with that 100%. He's not going to argue. That's why he's not going to sit there and argue with it. This is it. That's just it. So he goes on and he says, man is nothing more than a maggot. So maybe this was a viewpoint that Bildad put out to shock Job into seeing how lowly man is. But it's not like Job is arguing that. He never has argued that. Job also would never view any man as being this worthless. Now think about that idea. If we say that all men are like maggots, then after a while, what would our opinion of humankind be? We're nothing more than animals. We can't be held accountable for what we don't do, right? If you take that to its logical conclusion, then man is really worthless. And think about the idea that Job is not saying that man is worthless. We are worth something. And again, the story of the Bible teaches us that we are worth what God has said about us.
Yeah, and you contrast that with a passage that says that man is fearfully and wonderfully made.
That's right.
And that when God created man, he said it was good. So yes, we have strayed, but because we're made in the image of God, there is something valuable about us.
Right. There's something holy about us because God set us apart from the rest of his creation. There is something that he sees and values in us. And again, what often is so sad is when we as humans don't see and value what is in other humans as well. When we can easily dispatch a baby in the womb and we saying that it's just a blob of cells, we are down on the level of Satan, and we do not have the respect for God's creation that God himself gives us.
Uh-huh.
It's an amazing idea as we look at this and think about it in that respect. So again, he's not really saying anything. He's not really arguing anything. He's just, this is just the way it is. And it's kind of like, no, you've missed the point too. And so that's the reason why, as you see, beginning in chapter 26, Job is going to, in Job chapter 26 through chapter 31, you're going to see the biggest part of Job's argument. It's kind of like, I've listened to everything you guys have got to say. Now, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say. And we would probably sit back and say, in essence, okay, that should be the end of the book. But we still haven't talked about Elihu. Elihu has been sitting back watching this all along, and beginning in chapter, let's see, where am I looking at it? Hold on a minute. Yeah. Beginning in chapter 32, we're going to read about another fellow by the name of Elihu. And then we're going to start listening to what God has to say. So let's listen to Job 26 through chapter 31. So think about this. We've got a lot of passages here. Job is summing everything up. All right. He answers the argument, verses 1 through 4. Bildad, let's just read that. Job answered and said, how have you helped him who is without power? So Job is saying to Bildad, all right, your speech that you've just made, how did that help me? If I am without power, if I have nothing, how did that really help me? How did that speech help me? Okay.
Yeah.
So many times I think feel like we've got to say something, and I've said this 2 or 3 times. We've got to say something when the best thing we could ever do is just to keep our mouths shut. And Job is just as blunt as he could be right here. You haven't helped me a bit. You should have just been quiet. That should have been the end of it. So Bildad has taken himself to be a comforter of Job. He found himself arguing points that Job has already agreed with. And again, Job's answer here is sarcastic. How has your words helped me? How have you really helped me here? You can just kind of hear the sarcasm coming from his lips. And again, remember the idea. He said, how have you saved the arm that have no strength? The arm represents strength. So Job has lost all his strength, and Bildad's words have not strengthened, brought him any comfort whatsoever. It's just another attack. And he's tired of it. He's done. He's done. He chastises his friends because they're worthless to him. He said, what counsel? How have you counseled one who has no wisdom? You're saying all along that I have no wisdom. So all of your words, how is that helping me? He even, verse 4, to whom have you uttered words? Whose spirit came from you? He's in essence saying to Bildad what? If you were inspired, like Eliphaz had claimed, then why in the world are you saying this? It would have been best, as I've said on numerous occasions, it would have been best for him just to have kept his mouth shut. But he's got to add his last 2 cents worth. He's done. And God and Job both are arguing that this man you haven't helped in the matters whatsoever. So, beginning in verse 5, he says, 5 through 14, the dead tremble, and those under the waters and those inhabiting them. Sheol, the grave, is a lot of times what this means. I'm sorry. Got to get that washed down a little bit. So the dead tremble, and the King James Version says, dead things are formed from under the waters and the inhabitants thereof. So Job begins here with his lofty and sublime image of God, and far exceeds that of Bildad in the next few verses. Job will say this about God: dead things are formed from under the waters. The idea is that God's dominion. Bildad expressed the idea that God went to heaven, the stars and the moon. He says, I'm going to go from emphasize the idea of how great the universe is. But Job is saying, you know what? Think about the dead. The water suggests that God has dominion over the dead as well as over all life. Dead things are formed under the waters. Think about in the very beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form, and then he made water. Job is saying, verse 5, the dead tremble, those under the waters and those inhabiting them. So dead people, all these animals, they're going to praise God. So yeah, I see what you're trying to say. God has all power. He is powerful, but you've not helped me. Even I know how great God is. Even I know how wonderful he is in that respect. So he begins here in verse 5 with a beautiful image of God. And these are encouraging words as you read them. So let's listen to what he says. Number 1, he says, Sheol is marked before him, the grave of the dwelling place. Of the dead is open to God. God knows where every person on this planet is buried, or where the ashes of every person on this planet are. He knows where everything is. We know nothing of it. We cannot know it. I know where my relatives are buried. But the bottom line is that God knows every person from the time of Adam and Eve until now, where every body is. That's again, a staggering thought. Think about the multiplied millions, and we even say billions of people that have lived since the creation of the world. And he knows every one of them. He knows where they are. What a high view of God did he have. It was the highest view that you could ever possibly imagine. Job is saying God knows everything about it. Sheol is naked before him, and destruction has no covering. Destruction comes from the Greek or Hebrew word Abaddon. And a lot of times this Hebrew word could have the meaning of destruction or punishment of some sort. A lot of times it's translated hell, as Sheol is translated hell. Some people call Abaddon the angel of the bottomless pit. In Revelation 9, verse 11, that word is used to talk about that. And sometimes Proverbs 15:20, Proverbs 15:11, the word Abaddon, it sometimes refers to the pit itself, So the last sentence is probably here in Trinity. God sees the depths of the bottomless pit. Nothing is hidden from him. And so he says, he stretched out to north over the empty place and hangs the earth upon nothing. Now, a lot of times, if you're listening to discussions about the creation of the world and how the earth continues in its situation as it is right now, this passage is used to emphasize the idea of God's greatness and God's power. This passage anticipated this discoveries of science, proves the accuracy of the biblical account. Two major scientific ideas. Number one, in this idea, there seems to be the idea that the earth is spherical. In Columbus Day, however, what was I saying? Columbus, if you start out on this ocean, you're going to fall off the face of the earth.
Yeah, the world was.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, as a saying, they would say that the earth is flat.
Yeah, the earth is flat and you're going to sail off of it. But this passage suggests the idea, what? He hangs the earth on nothing. It suggests the idea of the spherical attitude of it. And there is the idea that the north is hung upon nothing. I've never done this, but if you talk to some scientists that look through telescopes, they say that if you take the telescope directly north as north can get, that at that area, in that part of the space, that there's no stars, nothing there. There's nothing there. It has nothing. He stretches out the north over the empty space. So again, he hangs the earth upon nothing. All right. Now, back in Greek times, we remember that the Greeks thought that the earth was sitting on the shoulders of Atlas. Remember? So think about that. And here he's saying what? He hangs the earth on nothing. There's not some huge being holding the earth up and being punished as a result of it. No, that's not going to happen. Again, he takes care of it. It stays where it's supposed to stay. Now, we do understand a lot more about gravity, and we understand a lot more how gravity pulls and so forth on other objects that's near it. That's the way God made it. But if you were looking at it again, back in Job's time, it would seem like that there's nothing up there to hold it up. Verse 8, he binds the clouds he bounds the water in his thick clouds. Every time I read this passage, I always think about heavy rain. And you can go outside, and right before the heavy rain comes, you see the gray, sometimes even just about black. It's so heavy. And you're just amazed. I'm amazed how all that water's staying up there. Then, of course, when it starts to rain, it falls upon the earth. But it always amazes me how all those tiny water droplets stay up there in those clouds and get carried the way they do. Whereas if you take a 5-gallon bucket of water and you try to lift it, it's so heavy that again, you know that water has weight. We all know that water has weight. So it's amazing to me how the sky, those clouds that seem to be puffy, are actually holding up water. It amazes Job as he goes on further. The clouds are not broken under it. He said, it amazes me, as it falls from the sky, the clouds are torn apart by the weight of the water. Now, again, the idea maybe that they had was the idea of earth being, or the clouds being something like a wineskin. And then when it stretched with all that water, it would burst. But the problem with that is what? It would all burst in certain areas of the world, and other areas of the world, there wouldn't be any. Now, you might say, well, that's true when you look at the Sahara Desert and so forth like that. But that was their way of thinking. That was their way of meditating upon these things. Notice back, he goes on a little further, verse 9. He covers the face of his throne and spreads his clouds over it. God does not exhibit his throne. God is hiding himself from man. He does not show man his ways. And even if he did show man his ways, would man comprehend it? No, I don't think so. He does not allow man to see everything he does, nor does he allow men to understand why he does what he does. That's a little disturbing to us, but at the same time, we need to understand that that just reminds us of how great God is. Anytime we bring God down to our level, we make a God in our image.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel that if God were to explain to us certain things, then we couldn't be able to fathom it.
We couldn't fathom it. That's right.
Job.
Right. Think about over the last 200 or 300 years, or even longer than that, maybe 1,000 years, scientific knowledge has increased. Think about the fact that we're able to talk to one another via air on a computer, which literally in the 1980s, nobody would have ever thought about anything like this, right? And we brag about our knowledge and but you see, God knew about all this before. And it just continues to amaze me how arrogant we humans become sometimes by trying to talk about all of our knowledge, and we haven't even begun to scratch the surface on a lot of this stuff. I'm just, so he throws back his throne. He has, verse 10, he drew a circular horizon on the face of the waters. The King James says he's compassed the water with bounds. In other words, even whenever you see it, there's boundaries about the water. Why is it that it rains in certain places and doesn't rain in other places? What's going on there? And of course, the meteorologist will sit down and tell you, well, it's because of the combination of the rain droplets and all this other stuff happening at the same time. How are they able to predict now the possibility of thunderstorms, and more than that, tornadoes and hurricanes? I think God sometimes, personally, reminds us and gives us storms to remind us that we're not in control of things as we think we are. To remind us of the fact that while we might be able to predict some things, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen that way. We remember that God in Genesis 1 separated the waters above the firmament to those below the firmament. God has set a boundary to the waters. And again, this is a primitive view of the earth being spherical. And so they think that the land was totally encompassed with water. And this water was considered darkness. He goes on in verse 11. He says, the pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at his rebuke. Well, what's holding it all together? Something we can't see. Gravity. Who made gravity? Obviously, men couldn't have ever come up with it. We know how to, quote, defy gravity. If you get enough speed and things going fast enough, you can break the bonds of earth, as we might say. But the bottom line is, think about it in this respect. We understand gravity, but he didn't explain it all to us. We had to learn it the hard way. He says the mountains, the pillars of heaven tremble, and they are astonished, amazed at his rebuke. He stirs up the sea with his power. We have had some hurricanes hit us earlier this spring. Some of us may have actually lived through hurricanes. Again, imagine the power to totally wipe out entire cities, to wash away all that man does. He stirs up the seas with his power. He breaks up the storm. He's the one that does all this. And so what does he do here? He tears it all apart. Think about Jesus calming the sea in Matthew 14. By his understanding, he smites the proud. We think we are powerful, but we haven't even begun to understand the power of God in creating the world, but also in how he can sustain the world. He smites and scourges and punishes the sea. Verse 13, by his spirit he adorned the heavens, and his hand pierced the fleeing serpent. These are the mere edges of his ways. I like what Job is saying. God is so powerful that we cannot even begin to understand him in any way. And these are just the edges of his ways. This is just the very point of it. He says, these are the edges of his ways. How small a whisper we hear of him. But the thunder of his power, who can understand? Wow, think about that. Think about that. That's God. And I am just continuing to be amazed. And I appreciate Job and the Bible here telling us this, because again, it reminds us of these very points.
Yeah.
I think we're in charge and we don't have a clue.
And that's why we need to remain humble.
Amen, bro.
Yeah.
Amen. 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 That's right. So many things beyond our understanding, and exactly. We can even begin to grasp it all. All right, we're going to stop there. We'll pick up with chapter 27. And now, like I keep trying to tell myself, I've got to kick it in high gear now. So
okay. All right.
I keep saying that, just so much here, and
yes.
There's so much encouragement here to me. Just remind myself, I'm not in charge. God is. Let him handle it.
Yeah.
And stop worrying about it. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Brother, thank you. You have.
Yeah.
If there's anything I can do for you, let me know. Okay.
Yeah. Just to remind you to send me those 300 verses.
I'll try to. I'm going to find that, look that up, see if there's a way. I might have it somewhere. And if I do, I'm going to let you look at that, because that was a powerful thing for me. I might look through here in just a few minutes while I'm waiting for this thing to convert. So,
okay,
I'll see what I can do. All right.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Great time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.